I hope you are doing good. In the previous problem, we had seen how to implement the polyfill for Promise.all. In this problem, we are going to create or write the polyfill for Promise.any. Promise.any is completely opposite of Promise.all. In Promise.any, if you read the definition from the MDN, you will see that Promise.any takes an iterable of promise objects. So it will take an array of promises as input. It returns a single promise that fulfills as soon as any of the promises in the iterable fulfills, which means if you are accepting an array of promises, the moment any promise from the array is resolved, sorry, then the promise.any will also resolve. Promise.any returns a promise and then it will resolve as soon as any of the promise from the array of promises that it takes as input is resolved. Otherwise, it rejects with the array of rejections of all the promise. So it will reject only when all the promises reject, and that too with the array of rejections of each promises. If any of the promise from the array fulfills, then the promise.any will also resolve and it will return the value of that resolved promise. So if you haven't seen the Promise.all polyfill, I highly recommend. We'll see how to create the Promise.any. The implementation is same, only change is in the condition. So in Promise.all, we check for if all the promises are resolved or not. In this, we'll check if all the promises are rejected or not. So let's start implementing this and then we'll follow the test case to test it. So here, let me create const promise any polyfill. This will take promise array as input, an array of promises, and it will return a promise. So return new promise, and that will either resolve or reject. And then inside this, we are going to iterate over the promises array. So I'm going to use the for each loop, and here it will return, it will iterate and get the first promise from the array and its index. And then inside this, we are going to track how many promises are resolved or rejected. So I'm going to maintain an result array rejected promises. This will store the result of the rejected promises, or sorry, the errors of the rejected promises. And then we are going to use another tracker, promises completed. That is because the promises with the promise.forEach will be invoked immediately or parallelly, but they can resolve at different times. So we need to track that if only when all the promises are fulfilled, which means either rejected or resolved, then we invoke the reject method for the any. In case of all, we had to invoke the resolve method. So here I'm going to add a check promise dot resolve. So promise dot then so we are going to add a check promise dot then, and then here it will have val, and we are going to resolve with the val. So as soon as any of the promise resolve, we are going to resolve with that value. Otherwise, in the catch section, we are going to get the error, and here we'll add a check. So we'll say that promises reject promises and at the current index. So we are going to store the reject value at the current index only. So that's why I'm making use of the index, and at the same index I'll storing the error message for the rejected promises, and here we'll store the error, and then I'm going to increase the promises completed count by 1, and at the end I'm going to add a check if promises completed is greater than or equal to promises array dot length, which means we are completed iterating all the promises. Then we are going to reject with the reject promises or array of the rejected promises outcome. So same implementation that we had in the promise.all polyfill, but here we are tracking the errors, there we are tracking the promises that were resolved. Now let's use this test case to check if things are working fine. So in the first test case, one promise will resolve. So let's see if we are getting the value of that single promise. So I have three values that will be resolving at 500, 600 and 200 milliseconds, but all these will resolve. So from these three, two will reject and one will resolve. That means we should get 600 as output with the value 2. Sorry, not 600, we'll get 2 as the output for the resolve. So if I pass this to our function Promise.any polyfill, then we should get 2 as output. First and third fails, second resolve, so we should get 2. If I run this, then we got 2 as output. What if I reject all the three? So we should get 1, 2, 3 all as output in the error. So we got 1, 2, 3 all in the error. Let me add extra console, so error and then this error methods, just to make sure that we are reaching to the error part. So see, Promise.any polyfill returns an promise. We have then and catch blocks. So the then part will be invoked when any of the promise from the array of promises is resolved. Otherwise, the catch block will be invoked when all the promises fail, and that too with the reasons for the failure of the promises. So we have a test case. Here we are invoking, we have created three promises and all of them reject after a specified duration, and we are passing a value to these functions. So 1, 2, 3 in the same order we are seeing the rejection. Even though this promise will resolve sooner, so because this is having a duration of 200 milliseconds, this will resolve sooner, but still we are maintaining the index, so we get 1, 2, 3, or the index or the order in which the promises are there in the array, we are getting the results also in the same order. So our implementation for promise.any is working fine. This last question, sum of functions return value running in parallel and in sequence, I have solved recently, so I'm not going to solve this one particularly. Rather, I'll just point to that video and you can see the solutioning on that over there. With this, I have completed solving all the 20 questions for the SDE1. I'll take some break after this because this is a time consuming process, and then I'll resume with the ST2 where we'll try to solve, I think under ST2 I have around 60 problems. So we'll see how much I can solve all on that. But just a heads up, if you are preparing for your front-end interviews, do check out my course alpha.learnersbucket.com. People from Uber, Atlassian, and ThoughtSpot, Meta have used this course to land a job. So do check it out.